It's just after 3 a.m. in a quiet Indiana neighborhood, and a 17-year-old girl is walking out of her own front door. No alarm goes off. No one wakes up. She's left behind a note, asking her family not to come looking for her. A home security camera catches one thing: a dark SUV pulling up outside, headlights cutting through the dark, and then she's inside it. Gone. When her family finds that note hours later, they do the only thing they can do. They call the police. But here's the problem. Nothing about that house looks like a crime happened. The doors are still locked. The windows haven't been touched. Her bag is packed. The handwriting is unmistakably hers. So investigators do exactly what the evidence tells them to do. They call it a runaway. No Amber Alert. No urgent search. Just a case file marked voluntary. Except it wasn't that simple.
Not even close.
Real quick, before we get further into this documentary, drop a comment and let me know what city or state you're watching from. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this is where the true crime stories that actually deserve your attention get told right. Now, back to Haley. For almost a full year before that morning, she'd been talking to someone online. A man, 39 years old, more than twice her age. It started in a video game. Then, it moved to Discord. Then, it moved somewhere much harder to trace. An encrypted app built so every message disappears the second it's read. That man later admits it. He's the one who showed up outside her house that night. He's the one she got into the car with. But then, he tells detectives something else. That he dropped her off, alive, on the side of a road in Ohio, and drove away. Detectives start checking his story, and piece by piece, it falls apart. His phone shows a route that doesn't match a single word he said. A search warrant turns up far more than anyone expected. And in one follow-up interview, he answers a single question in a way that changes the entire direction of the investigation. He keeps insisting he has no idea what happened to Haley. But while he's saying that, investigators are already pulling data off a device he never got the chance to wipe clean. And buried inside it is the answer to a question that's about to change everything. What really happened after Haley Busby got into that man's car? In January of 2026, 17-year-old Haley Busby vanished from her home in Fishers, Indiana. On the surface, it read like a textbook teenage runaway. No broken locks, no shattered glass, no sign that anyone had forced their way inside. Haley had written a note, packed a bag, and walked out under her own power. So that's exactly how investigators classified it at first. A runaway. It didn't take long for that story to fall apart. Before she disappeared, Haley had been talking to a man she'd met online.
39-year-old Tyler Thomas is the suspect in the disappearance of 17-year-old Haley Busby.
His name was Tyler Thomas. He was 39. She was 17. They'd connected through an online game, and according to investigators, he was the one who drove to her house and picked her up that night. His story was that he dropped her off safe, somewhere on the side of a road in Ohio. Detectives went to work checking that story, and it didn't hold up for long. Investigators would later determine that after she vanished, Haley and Thomas had actually stayed together at a short-term rental property.
The worst part is the effect it has on the family members. This must be just disheartening to them. What happened and why did it happen and how did it happen? There's a lot of questions unanswered. I'm sure that they've got in their mind.
And there was never any evidence she was seen alive again after that. The more investigators dug, the clearer it became that he'd tried to cover his tracks, and his own version of events grew less believable with every piece of evidence they turned up. Ask yourself this: how does a missing teenager's case not get a full-scale search when the last person known to have been with her is a grown man who openly admits he's the one who picked her up? But to understand how a missing 17-year-old girl slipped through the cracks in the first place, you have to go back to the morning she disappeared, and to who she actually was before any of this happened. Her family didn't notice Haley was gone first. What they noticed was that everything else looked completely normal. No broken locks, no shattered windows, nothing out of place, just Haley missing, her bag missing, and a note she'd left on purpose, asking the people who loved her not to come looking. She was 17. It was 6 a.m. on January 6th, 2026, and she'd walked out of her bedroom in Fishers, Indiana, entirely on her own. That detail matters because police were looking at the exact same picture her family was. A teenager who packs a bag and leaves a note looks, on paper, like a teenager who chose to leave. The Fishers Police Department didn't get the facts wrong. They got the meaning of those facts wrong. And that difference is the whole reason this case unfolded the way it did. Haley Page Busby was born October 9th, 2008. She lived in Fishers with her father, Bo, her stepmother, Renee, and her little sister, Sabria. Her mother, Lindsay Simmons, and her brother, Elijah, rounded out the family. And by every account, Haley was the kind of person a household quietly builds itself around, without anyone realizing it until she's not there anymore. She was shy at first. That's the first thing almost everyone remembers about her. But once she opened up, people didn't forget her. She was funny, sharp, always laughing, with a smile people described as contagious. It's the kind of word people use when they can't quite find a better one. But in Haley's case, they meant it literally. She could change the entire mood of a room just by walking into it. She had dimples, and she had a knack for making whoever she was talking to feel like the only person in the room. She was also driven. A strong student, a member of her school's TV journalism program, with a real plan already in motion. Indiana University, a journalism degree, a career telling other people's stories. She was already saving for it, putting money aside a little at a time. 3 or 4 days a week, she waited tables at Kitchen on Main in Fortville. Her coworkers describe exactly what you'd expect. Reliable, hardworking, always on time, always smiling at customers. The kind of employee any manager would build a schedule around. And every single night, no matter what else was going on in her own life, she came home and tucked her little sister into bed. Sit with that for a second. A 17-year-old who worked multiple days a week, saved her own money for college, had a real plan for her future already mapped out, and still made time every night to make sure her kid sister felt safe before falling asleep. That was Haley Busby, before January of 2026. Here's what her family didn't know yet. By the morning she disappeared, someone had been talking to Haley for an entire year. Not a classmate, not someone from a party, not someone from school at all. Someone she'd never met face to face, who'd spent 12 months online, patiently earning her trust. The note was real. The packed bag was real. Walking out that door was a real decision she made. But every part of it was the end result of a long, calculated campaign that made leaving feel like it was entirely her own idea. Her family didn't know that. The police didn't know that. And standing alone in her room sometime before 6 a.m., writing a note asking the people she loved not to look for her, Haley may not have fully understood it either. But you're about to. January 5th, 2026 was a Monday, the first day back at school for the spring semester of her junior year. Her family says the day was completely unremarkable, no different from any other Monday. The last anyone saw her was 10 p.m. that night. 8 hours later, she was gone. When Bo and Renee woke up and Haley wasn't getting ready for school, they checked her room. The note was there. Some of her things were gone, and they called the Fishers Police Department immediately, because there was no version of reading that note that let them do nothing. Officers responded and saw exactly what was in front of them. No forced entry, no struggle, a note in Haley's own handwriting, a bag clearly packed on purpose. They classified her as a runaway. No Amber Alert went out. That's the decision people won't forget. It wasn't negligence. Statistically, when a teenager leaves a note and takes her belongings, it points to someone who left voluntarily. That's exactly how the system is designed to interpret cases like this. And that's exactly what it did. What the system couldn't do was look at a note written by a 17-year-old and recognize that the words weren't fully her own anymore. They were the end product of an entire year of someone else's influence, laid down so slowly and so carefully that Haley herself likely believed those were her own thoughts. That's what grooming looks like from the outside. A voluntary choice, a teenager deciding to leave on her own. From every angle available that morning, that's all it looked like, and there was no way for the officers standing in that bedroom to see past it. This isn't a failure unique to one department in one town either. Police departments across the country work from the same statistics, look for the same signs of forced entry and struggle, and a grooming case, by design, will almost never show either one. It's a blind spot built into the entire system. In the note, Haley said she'd run away and asked everyone not to search for her. Her parents called it in anyway, because that's what parents do when something feels wrong, even before they can explain why. Investigators would later trace the start of the grooming back to early 2025, a full year before Haley left home. Whoever was talking to her wasn't in a rush. That timeline wasn't an accident. It was exactly long enough to build trust one conversation at a time, patiently, methodically, without ever tipping his hand. And that's what never fit the runaway story. Haley wasn't a teenager who felt lost, who didn't know where her life was headed, or who was looking for a way to escape it. She had a job, a plan, college savings, a little sister she tucked in every night. You don't spend a year building a future for yourself only to throw it all away on a random impulse one day. Her family felt that the moment they read the note, even before they could prove it, something, or someone, had changed her mind, and they knew it. The real question investigators ultimately had to answer was never whether Haley left voluntarily. She did. The question was who convinced her to leave, how they did it, and where she was headed. And the answer to that last part would take far longer to find than anyone in that house could have imagined on the morning of January 6th. She had a packed bag, she left a note, and she was heading towards something that someone she trusted, someone she believed she knew, had spent an entire year quietly building for her, one step at a time. Her family had already called the police. The police had a classification that matched the visible evidence. And the gap between those two facts would shape everything that happened next. One more thing about that morning matters. Haley asked, in her own handwriting, for no one to come looking. Her parents made the call anyway, within minutes, before anyone knew what had actually happened, before a single piece of evidence had been gathered or a single conversation recovered. That single decision is the only reason this case ever got an official beginning at all. Otherwise, it's entirely possible that note would have been taken completely at face value. The classification would never have changed, and Haley would have stayed listed as a runaway until every lead had gone cold on its own. What investigators uncovered as they started pulling this case apart wasn't something anyone understood overnight. Whoever was behind it had been careful, genuinely careful. The platform, the method, the timeline, even the note itself had all been built with so much patience and precision that the first look at the evidence pointed exactly where it was designed to point, away from the truth. A little after 3 a.m. on January 6th, Haley Busby walked out of her parents' house and got into a dark SUV. Her family's own security camera caught it. Police couldn't make out the driver, but they pulled surveillance footage from around the area until they landed on a license plate. It came back to a 2014 Acura, registered to a woman who's never been publicly named. When investigators reached her, she said she hadn't even been in Indiana that night. She was in Florida. But she gave them something they needed: the name of the man who may have been driving her car, Tyler Thomas, 39 years old. Sit with that. A man with no known connection to the Busby family, unknown to police, and never previously tied to this case, showed up in the middle of the night to pick up a 17-year-old girl, driving a car that belonged to a woman states away. A woman who happened to have his phone number saved. Nobody's ever fully explained that part. How did she know him? Why did she have his number? What was the relationship between the two of them? None of that has ever been made public. It's one thread of this case that's still just hanging there, unanswered, maybe permanently. But that phone number was enough. Investigators tracked it to a house on Hunter Avenue in the Victorian Village neighborhood of Columbus, Ohio. On January 16th, 10 days after Haley disappeared, officers from the Fishers Police Department, working alongside the Columbus Division of Police, found Tyler Thomas there. The department would later publicly describe him as located within days of Haley's disappearance. 10 days isn't within days. That phrasing wasn't an accident. It's the kind of wording that shapes how a timeline sounds to the public. and it's worth paying attention to when a department chooses to describe 10 days that way. During questioning, Tyler cooperated with investigators. At least, that's how it's officially described. His first version of events was that he'd been in Indiana scouting locations, including, he said, the local airport and an apple orchard. An apple orchard in January at 3 in the morning. He eventually dropped that story for something closer to the truth, or at least his version of it. He admitted he knew Haley, he admitted he'd picked her up that morning, and he told detectives exactly where he claimed to have let her out. The intersection of U.S. Route 25 and State Route 320 in Eaton, Ohio. A rural crossroads, the middle of the night, the dead of winter. That's where he insisted he'd left her. By then, investigators already understood something important. Tyler said he and Haley had known each other online for a full year, first through Discord, later through Roblox and League of Legends too. A 39-year-old man had maintained contact with a girl who was only 16 when it started, across 3 different platforms, for 12 straight months. His explanation for all of it was simple. He said he was just helping her run away, that he'd driven her roughly 100 miles, dropped her at a rural intersection, and had nothing to do with her after that. Nobody investigating this believed that for a second. Of course they didn't. Someone who spends an entire year building a trusting relationship with a child doesn't drive her to a deserted intersection in rural Ohio, wish her good luck, and drive home. That's not what that year was for. But on January 16th, investigators still didn't have enough legal grounds to arrest him. So he walked. The only thing they could do at that point was change how the case was labeled. On January 20th, the Fishers Police Department went public. Haley hadn't acted alone, they said. She'd left with a plan already in place, which is why it was first called a runaway. But based on evidence they weren't ready to release, her case was being reclassified. Missing endangered juvenile. 14 days. That's how long it took to move Haley out of the runaway file. From the very first morning, her parents insisted she was in danger, and her father, Bo, hadn't waited on that classification to catch up. He'd been building his own case file from Haley's digital footprint and handing it straight to investigators, rallying friends, relatives, and total strangers, until the search grew into something far bigger than a typical missing person effort. Local businesses paid for billboards. People wrapped their cars in her photo and missing person flyers. Volunteers distributed flyers across Indiana and neighboring states. A social media campaign ran around the clock. And every bit of that happened while Haley was still, officially, on paper, a runaway. A search warrant hit Tyler's residence on January 21st. Investigators sat down with him again, and this round was worse than the first. He admitted there'd been another app the whole time, one Bo had never found in Haley's digital trail, one law enforcement had no way to see into. It was called Session.Session. Allows someone to create an account without a phone number, an email address, or any personal information at all. The platform doesn't collect IP addresses. It doesn't collect location data. It doesn't retain metadata. It uses end-to-end encryption and supports messages that disappear on their own. The terms of service require users to confirm they're at least 18, but there's no actual age verification. None at all. It was functionally invisible, both to law enforcement and to the company that runs it. Tyler told investigators that was exactly the point, that he'd chosen Session because he knew it would keep police locked out of whatever he and Haley had said to each other. Then he circled back to the same explanation. He was just helping her run away. Trail the pattern here. A public gaming lobby, to more private messages, to an encrypted app built around messages that erase themselves the moment they're read. Every single move requiring Haley to willingly follow him one step further, which meant she already trusted him before she ever took that next step. That process ran an entire year, and it ended on a platform designed so nothing could ever be recovered. And his explanation was still that he was only helping her leave. By then, investigators had his admissions. They had the Session detail. They had the timeline. What they didn't have, still, was Haley. On the same day the case was reclassified, Bo Busby was out organizing search efforts, hanging billboards, spreading flyers across state lines, with no idea that the one lead everyone was chasing might already be a dead end. Tyler had given investigators a very specific location, that intersection in Eaton, Ohio, and he'd described it in enough detail that it almost sounded like a place he'd actually stood. Investigators had to decide whether that was the truth or a deliberate misdirection meant to send the whole search the wrong way. Was he telling the truth about Eaton, Ohio? Or was there an entirely different reason he'd picked that exact spot? His own story couldn't answer that question anymore. He'd already given his version of events. If the real answer existed anywhere, it wasn't going to come from him. And here's what Bo didn't know, while he kept organizing search efforts that same day. The session messages were already gone. Everything Tyler had said to Haley over that entire year, every instruction, every destination, every promise, had vanished the moment it was read. The platform had done exactly what it was built to do. The only account of what happened between them was Tyler's own account. And according to him, he'd dropped a 17-year-old girl at a rural intersection in the middle of an Ohio winter and simply driven away. At one point, a detective asked him directly, if he'd done something to her, would he say so? He answered no. After that, he asked for a lawyer. Don't skip past that. It's not the denial that matters. It's what came right after it. Someone who's done nothing doesn't answer a question like that the way Tyler did. An innocent man, asked point blank whether he'd tell police if he'd hurt someone, tends to say yes without even thinking about it, because the answer is obvious to him. Tyler didn't do that. He said no, and then he stopped talking altogether. What Tyler didn't know, sitting in that room, was that the search warrant being executed on his property at that exact moment was already unraveling everything he thought he'd buried. He didn't know the phone in evidence was about to make every one of his denials meaningless. That the answer to where Haley was had been sitting inside his own devices the entire time he sat there talking to detectives. What investigators pulled off that device was worse than most of them were prepared for. There was material on it that placed Haley at that Columbus property and confirmed she'd come to harm there. Material Tyler had tried to erase and failed to fully delete. Investigators were able to identify the exact property because they'd stood there themselves only hours earlier. The house on Hunter Avenue that Tyler had casually described as just a place he used. That evidence confirmed something crucial. He had never dropped Haley off anywhere. She had been at that property the entire time. There were also signs he'd approached other children the same way. That's as far as this documentary is going into that part of it. And honestly, that's as far as it needs to go. What matters for the rest of Haley's story is the location data, because that's what told the story Tyler couldn't delete. It confirmed he picked Haley up early on January 6th, exactly as investigators already believed, and it placed the two of them at the Columbus property. But then it showed something nobody had known yet. That same day, Tyler drove Haley out to a rented property in Hocking County, Ohio, booked on Airbnb, and the data showed they stayed there overnight. The next morning, January 7th, Tyler left that rental at 9:25 and drove to Wayne National Forest, where his phone sat until 2:15 that afternoon. Nearly 5 hours investigators would later tie directly to what happened to Haley. After that, he drove back to Columbus. When they asked him about the rental, he said Haley was never there. Just a solo trip, according to him. There was only one problem with that story. When he made the reservation, he listed 2 guests. That single detail, one number on a booking form, gave investigators probable cause to search the Airbnb and the surrounding property. And it turned up something Tyler couldn't lie his way around. By January 31st, 2026, there was enough evidence to take him into custody. Authorities say he voluntarily turned himself in after being asked to do so. That same day, he was charged with possessing and distributing illegal material involving children, and with tampering with evidence. The following day, the Fishers Police Department held a press conference, and for the first time, specific details of Haley's case were made public. Hours later, on February 1st, 2026, one day after Tyler walked into that building and surrendered, he led investigators to where Haley was found.
It pains me today to let you know that after an extensive investigation, we feel that Haley is deceased. I spent some time with the family this morning, along with Chief Gephardt, and their wishes were truly to express what an incredible human being Haley was. She was a bright light in the family. She was a wonderful big sister. She had a tremendous amount of promise and hope. She was excited about moving on to university, and she was an incredible human being. And I know that her family is devastated currently, and I'm confident that our community will rally in the coming hours, days, and weeks to stand with that family in their grief and share in the burden of mending and healing from this tragic loss.
Unfortunately, this is tragic news for our community. Our detectives identified a suspect, 39-year-old Tyler Thomas of Ohio. Because of evidence obtained and the statements made by the suspect, the investigation is now moved to recovery efforts. On January 6, we responded to the Busby residence. Her parents had reported that she had left overnight. Our officers and our detectives diligently began the process to locate her, using all of our resources available. Throughout the investigation, we were able to identify an unknown vehicle that had been in Haley's neighborhood the night she had gone missing. Using technology, our detectives identified Thomas as the suspect she had left with. We made contact with him in Ohio, and he admitted to picking Haley up at her home. He told us that he dropped her off on the side of the road in western Ohio. However, through continued investigations, his initial story was determined to be untrue. We continued to diligently work with the FBI, the Indiana State Police, and our Ohio partners, the Columbus Police Department and the Hocking County Sheriff's Office. And after further investigation, Columbus Police Department's homicide unit assisted in serving search warrants where more evidence was collected at the home and the vehicle he had picked Haley up in. The investigation confirmed Haley to be at the Thomas home in Columbus and at a short-term rental in Hocking County. The Hocking County Sheriff's Office served search warrants for the short-term rental property and coordinated the use of aerial drones, canine, and physical search techniques to try to find Haley. Investigators from all agencies involved continue to search for Haley. The suspect is in police custody in Ohio on charges associated with this case, but has not been charged with her murder at this time. This is an ongoing investigation that now continues in Ohio. We will continue to support those agencies and help with their investigation in any way possible. Our hearts are with her family, her friends, and our community as we try to get through this terrible time together.
Additional details about how she died have never been released, and I'm not going to guess at them here. The fact itself is enough. I've covered a lot of cases. This one has stayed with me. Haley Busby was 17 years old. She was considered missing for 26 days. And the man who knew exactly where she was spent that entire time walking free. Even though Tyler personally led investigators to where Haley was found, he still hadn't been charged with her murder. His bond was set at $1,500,000. His attorney stated he had no intention of posting bond, and that Tyler Thomas planned to plead not guilty. Think about what that means. He personally took investigators to that location. He knew exactly where it was because he'd been there on a documented date for nearly 5 hours. And his own phone confirmed every mile of the trip. There's no version of those facts that requires additional interpretation, and yet the word murder still didn't appear in the charges against him. Investigators asked the public to be patient. That's a difficult thing to ask of anyone who's followed this case. It's even harder to ask of Haley's family, who had already waited 26 days, not knowing if their daughter was alive, and were now being asked to wait even longer for the right charge to be filed. But in the weeks that followed, the reason for the delay became a lot clearer. When investigators returned to the Airbnb and searched it a second time, they found something the first search had missed: forensic evidence throughout the residence. Evidence that changed their entire theory of where Haley was actually killed. The Airbnb in Hocking County, the property Tyler had described as nothing more than a solo getaway, the same property where he'd listed 2 guests on the reservation, is now believed by prosecutors to be the place where Haley lost her life. On February 10th, the federal government joined the case. The original 2 charges were dismissed and replaced with federal charges.
It's impossible to understate the tragic nature of this circumstance. And again, I want to emphasize, and not being gratuitous, but our client had every right in the world to keep his mouth shut and not participate and let whatever chips there were fall where they may. He did precisely the opposite. He's been cooperative to the extent that, he's been able, and that cooperation has been fruitful. I can tell you that yesterday we accompanied law enforcement and the FBI to Perry County, and we assisted with pinpointing the location of Ms. Busby.
Will he be charged with homicide in Perry or Hocking County?
We anticipate that charges in that regard will come from Hocking County.
Do you know when?
We don't. As you can imagine, these charges here, were agreed upon, and they're, I don't want to call them a placeholder, but, he's not going to make bond, so nobody's trying to rush anything. I mean, there's some procedural considerations for all parties at play, but right now, everybody has time to take a breath and move ahead accordingly. There's a difference between being responsible for certain acts of which one is not proud, and also distinguishing from taking another's life. I can tell you that he will be entering a not guilty plea if and when he's charged with a homicide in this matter, and will proceed accordingly.
If murder charges are added on top of what he's already facing, Tyler could be looking at a lengthy prison sentence, and potentially the death penalty. And when those new federal charges were announced, prosecutors revealed something that had never before appeared in the public case record. January 6th, 2026, was not the first time Tyler Thomas had met Haley Busby in person. He'd traveled to Indiana twice during 2025. Bank records placed him at a gas station in Indiana on July 5th, 2025. After that stop, he went straight to the restaurant where Haley worked, walked into the very place where she worked in her own hometown, and no one who knew Haley had any idea who he was or why he was there. Then, on July 2nd, 2025, a photograph shows Tyler and Haley together inside his vehicle. Cell phone records also show he made a call from a location consistent with the two of them being together that day. He'd already traveled to see her twice before he ever picked her up on January 6th. He'd been inside the building where she worked. He'd been alone with her in his vehicle months before anyone in Haley's life knew he existed. That's what grooming really looks like from the outside. It looks like absolutely nothing is happening at all. Haley was 16 years old when Tyler first made contact online. She had just turned 17 when she disappeared. But even setting her age aside completely, Indiana law has recently changed. A new statute now exists, passed in direct response to cases exactly like this one, addressing situations where an adult uses their position or influence to groom a child into what only looks like voluntary consent. And that law exists in part because of what Haley's family chose to do after they lost her, because they refused to let their story end with grief alone.
News of Haley's tragic death has also gained attention here at the State House, both the attention of Governor Mike Braun and lawmakers. Haley's family has started a petition asking lawmakers to pass Haley's Law, and Governor Braun said he believes that lawmakers should do something this session to address that. I spoke with some lawmakers, including two who represent Haley's family, and they say they're looking at what can be done.
We all are grieving with you. Thoughts and prayers are with you.
A message from Indiana Governor Mike Braun to the family of 17-year-old Haley Busby. The family of the Fishers teen has their own message for the people who make decisions at the Indiana State House. Pass Haley's Law to protect others from online predators. According to the petition, police did not issue an Amber Alert for Haley because they had no proof she was abducted and she was classified as a runaway. No Silver Alert went out either because Haley didn't have a disability or medical condition to warrant it. The petition says a Pink Alert would fill in the gaps in the alert system and cover missing people and kids when credible risk factors exist. In a tweet, Governor Braun said he's working with Indiana State Police to identify solutions to those gaps. And in an interview Tuesday, the governor also called out Big Tech.
Big Tech is going to have to start taking responsibility. These are their platforms.
This session, the Senate considered a bill that would have put restrictions on social media for minors, but that part of the bill was taken out before the Senate passed it. Governor Braun indicated support for the request Haley's parents are making for lawmakers to do something.
I think it'd be smart to do something now while we're still in session.
They didn't wait for every charge to be finalized before they acted. In the middle of the worst tragedy of their lives, they set out to make sure the exact legal gap Tyler had exploited would never be available to the next person who tried something like this again. The internet didn't create people who target kids, but it gave them something they'd never had before: direct access to children inside their own homes, inside their own bedrooms, through devices their parents had bought them, devices their schools often require them to use. The platforms where Tyler first contacted Haley weren't hidden corners of the internet. They were ordinary places kids visit every single day, places everyone considers normal, places where an adult talking to a kid doesn't automatically raise a flag, because adults use those same platforms for completely legitimate reasons too. And once that initial contact happens on an open platform, the next step is almost always the same. Move the conversation somewhere harder to monitor, somewhere that offers more cover, somewhere the message history is much harder to recover later. Session was one of those platforms. There are others. The specific app was never really the point. The point was getting Haley comfortable keeping a secret, and that's exactly what an experienced groomer spends weeks, sometimes months, quietly building before ever asking a kid to hide something. Tyler had been creating that willingness with Haley since at least the summer of 2025, and possibly even earlier. The complete timeline of what actually passed between them has still never been fully released. But one fact is certain. When he drove to Indiana on the morning of January 6, 2026, Haley got into his vehicle willingly. She got in that car because she trusted him. And that trust was never her mistake. It was the direct result of months of deliberate manipulation on his part. That distinction matters. It matters to every parent and every kid who might one day encounter someone like Tyler Thomas in a place that feels completely safe. Haley's family understood that difference better than almost anyone, and understanding it wasn't enough for them. They went to the Indiana General Assembly. They sat in lawmakers' offices and told the story of their daughter to the people with the power to actually change the law. And they did all of it while still waiting for the answer to another question entirely. Would the man who took her ever be formally charged with her murder? That's what this family was doing while Tyler Thomas remained in custody on that $1,500,000 bond, preparing to plead not guilty. The federal charges against him were already extremely serious, but the biggest question hanging over the entire case still hadn't been answered. Would the word murder ever actually appear in an official indictment next to his name? By then, investigators already had his location data. They had everything seized from his devices. They had the Airbnb reservation listing 2 guests. They had the forensic evidence recovered from the second search of that rental.
2 bills into law inspired by the death of 17-year-old Haley Busby. One expands the definition of a missing child to include high-risk missing people. It also extends a Silver Alert program to missing children. The other adds protections for minors online and strengthens parental control. Social media platforms must now get parental consent for users under 16. The bill was championed by Haley's family after she was reported missing in January.
Indiana could be known and placed on the leaderboard across the country as a place that protects its children, and the risk and vulnerability and the threat that's within our homes, our community, and the state will start to dissipate. And so I appreciate all the hard work and the effort and the fight that you guys are taking to it. So thank you.
The Airbnb sat in Hocking County. The forest where Haley was found sat in Perry County. 2 jurisdictions, 1 case, and a decision that would shape the entire legal strategy in ways the public couldn't see yet. But one thing was already clear. A 17-year-old girl from Fishers, Indiana, had been missing for 26 days. And during that entire time, her family lived without knowing whether she was still alive. The man who knew the answer to that question spent those same 26 days insisting he had no idea where she was. Right up until the day after he voluntarily surrendered, when he led investigators into an Ohio forest and showed them exactly what he'd done. Think about how many people you've talked to online just this past week, without really knowing who they are. Not just strangers in a comment section. People you've messaged for work. People you've gamed with. Usernames you've seen so often they started to feel familiar. That's become completely normal, and that's not an accident. It's exactly the environment that made what happened to Haley possible. And it's the same environment all of us are still living in right now. Gaming platforms remain one of the most vulnerable spaces online. Roblox and League of Legends are among the platforms most frequently mentioned in cases like this one, and the reason lies in how they're designed. Huge numbers of users share the same servers. Those servers include public chat rooms, and from those public chats, it's only a few clicks to private messages. The entire structure allows a conversation to move from a crowded public space to a completely private one in just a few steps. And at none of those stages does the platform verify who's actually on the other side of the conversation. In 2023 alone, Roblox reported more than 13,000 child safety incidents to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Since 2018, at least 30 arrests have been documented, tied to adults who targeted kids they'd first met on that platform specifically. 30 arrests, and that number only counts the cases that actually ended in an arrest. It doesn't include the cases that were never reported, never investigated, or never produced enough evidence to support criminal charges. And here's the part that makes it worse. Roblox is marketed and widely trusted by parents as one of the more kid-friendly corners of the internet. Cartoonish, colorful, built for children. That reputation is exactly what makes the platform useful to someone looking to build trust with a child without raising suspicion in the first place. The pattern in cases like these is almost always the same. It starts with someone building trust in a public chat, where everything looks like ordinary conversation about a game. Then the discussion moves somewhere else. Snapchat, Discord, Session, any platform offering more privacy, fewer message records, less oversight. Once the conversation goes private, it changes. Talk about the game gives way to personal questions, then to something else entirely. By the time a kid begins to understand what's happening, the relationship already feels real. The trust feels earned. The person on the other side of the screen has spent weeks or months being patient, attentive, and kind, and that patience is the single most powerful tool they have. In January 2026, Roblox changed its system. It now requires age verification to access chat features, either through facial age estimation or by uploading a government-issued identification document. Artificial intelligence estimates a user's approximate age and sorts them into a group with other users of a similar range. That's the system currently in place. But ask yourself how much protection that actually provides on a platform where the greatest danger comes from people pretending to be someone they're not. There's a reason companies like Roblox have faced a growing number of lawsuits. It isn't because nothing's been done. It's because what's been done hasn't matched the scale of a problem the company has known about for years. And it's in that exact gap, between knowing a problem exists and actually closing it, that kids get hurt. Haley's family isn't waiting for the courts to finish their work. And they're not waiting on the platforms to update their policies either. Court cases take years. Corporate policy changes take even longer, and often only happen after enough lawsuits pile up to force the issue. Haley's family didn't have the luxury of waiting on either one, so they proposed a specific solution and gave it a name: Haley's Law. It has 3 parts, and every one of them directly addresses a specific failure exposed by Haley's case. None of them are abstract ideas. Start with the alert system, because that's where the first and most obvious failure occurred. The first part is a new alert system called Pink Alert. When Haley disappeared, she didn't meet the criteria for an Amber Alert. She didn't qualify for a Silver Alert either. On the surface, it looked like she'd left voluntarily, and technically, at least on paper, she had. But no existing alert system can tell the difference between a kid who genuinely walks away on her own and a kid who's been psychologically maneuvered into it. From the outside, those two situations look almost identical, and right now, the system treats them exactly the same way. Haley's family argues they are fundamentally different. Amber Alert was created in 1996. Back then, stranger danger meant a man in a van near a playground. It didn't mean a 39-year-old spending months building a relationship with a child through a gaming platform, convincing her he could be trusted, then arranging a face-to-face meeting under false pretenses. The threat has changed. The alert system hasn't. Pink Alert would trigger on a completely different set of red flags. Credible evidence of online grooming or coercive digital communication. Contact with someone unknown to the family, regardless of age. unusual or suspicious travel plans, signs of trafficking or exploitation, credible evidence a missing person is in danger, circumstances involving isolation or concealment or financial control, added vulnerability because of age, or simply a sudden disappearance with no way to confirm where someone actually is. Haley's case checked several of those boxes at once. The obvious pushback is that too many alerts eventually get tuned out, the same way people tune out car alarms. And that's a fair concern. But at the very least, it means the existing categories need updating to reflect how this actually happens in 2026. Because right now, they don't. Indiana has already made some progress. There wasn't enough time left in the legislative session to introduce an entirely new bill, so lawmakers folded the necessary language into legislation that was already moving through the process.
This evening, the family of a Fishers teen is honoring her life by helping other students.
Applications are now open for the Haley Page Busby Pink with a Purpose Scholarship.
Fox 59's Scarlett O'Hara explains how it will recognize seniors who lead with care, kindness, and courage.
Graduating seniors from Hamilton Southeastern High School here, where Haley Busby walked the halls, or Fishers High School, can now apply for the Pink with a Purpose Scholarship in her honor.
She helps so many others feel seen and valued and not alone. And we know that the smallest acts of kindness can have life-saving impacts.
Haley's Army for Children isn't looking to only reward star athletes or valedictorians. Through their nonprofit, Busby's family wants to make sure the light she poured into her community lives on.
Haley, she did have plans in a folder full of pamphlets to go to look at different colleges. And yeah, I think some of it is continuing to support children and their dreams and the great work that they're doing.
Now her father, Bo Busby, says protecting other kids from internet predators is the core mission of the nonprofit.
I can't think of a more worthy fight. And, I'm sort of just unwilling to accept where things are today.
With a community willing to join that fight through fundraisers and donations, Busby says the organization is rolling out training and education programs for parents on internet safety and actively offering support to families of missing children. He wants to continue building on Haley's legacy and expand the scholarship to more schools next year. But for now, Busby says they're taking things day by day.
I think it's given hope to a lot of people to see something so tragic, but that has given so many a purpose.
Amendments to House Bill 1303 expanded the legal definition of a missing child to include disappearances under circumstances suggesting elevated risk. Those changes were approved unanimously on February 9th, 2026, and in April, Governor Mike Braun signed the bill into law. Governor Braun also signed a separate measure requiring social media platforms to obtain parental consent for users under the age of 16.
Good evening. My name is Chris, and I'm one of the pastors here. On behalf of Haley's father, Bo, I was asked to read this letter. Dear Haley Page, hi, sweetheart. I want you to know how incredibly grateful I am for the time we had together on this earth. I still consider myself the luckiest dad ever. You and I made so many beautiful memories, and I will carry them with me forever, revisiting them every single day. I will always feel your sweet hugs and kisses on my cheek, though now I won't have to wipe off the lip gloss. You'd apologize for that, but I always wore it with pride. You saved me the day you were born, Haley, and you continued to save me every day after that. You gave me a purpose to love and protect you. I will do my very best to share the same love with others, and I will never forget where that love began. I witnessed your love and selflessness every single day. I could not have asked for a more loving, respectful daughter. You mean so much to so many. Your relationship with Rania, your little sis, your grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends was something truly special. I continue to hear from others how much you meant to them and the incredible impact you had. You were my shy girl, but your presence was always strong through the kindness, love, and beauty you shared. You always put others first without reservation or complaint. I want you to know that Rania, Sabria, and I know how much you loved us. Please guide me as I try my best to tuck in your sister the way you did every night. And sweetheart, we are at peace knowing that you know just how much you continue to be loved. I know the teenage years were tough at times, but you navigated them with such grace and strength. Like so many others, you may have felt alone at times, despite the love that surrounded you. But I want you to know this wasn't your fault. And today, I'm here to show you that you are never alone and you never will be. Lastly, I want you to know that the changes we make going forward will be rooted in the love you brought into the world during your time with us. We will be okay, sweetheart. Please allow yourself to finally rest. We love you. With all my love, your proud dad.
That's still not the full version of Haley's Law. The Busby family plans to introduce the complete bill during Indiana's 2027 legislative session. What became law in 2026 is only the foundation, not the finished framework they're hoping to build. The second part of Haley's Law focuses on teaching children in school how to recognize grooming. Indiana's curriculum already covers cyberbullying and human trafficking, but there's no requirement to teach students what grooming actually looks like, how it works, or how it feels in its earliest stages. That's not an accidental oversight. It's a policy choice, one that leaves kids without maybe the single most important tool available to them: the ability to recognize the process before it's too late. Education alone won't stop a predator. No one claims that it will. But a kid who understands what grooming looks like has a far better chance of recognizing it while it's happening to them. Haley's family isn't waiting for the law to take effect before starting that work. They're already meeting with communities, already talking to parents and students about how these relationships get built online, what the early warning signs look like, and what a kid should do if something doesn't feel right. The third part of Haley's Law focuses on accountability, for both offenders and for the platforms themselves. First, tougher penalties for grooming offenses. Second, a requirement that online platforms respond to law enforcement requests for user information without unnecessary delay, with real consequences for platforms that fail to do so. When investigators are searching for a missing child and urgently need information, response time isn't a minor bureaucratic detail. It can be the difference between finding that child in time and not. The proposal would also require platforms to disclose to families how long they typically take to respond to those requests, so parents can make informed decisions about what their kids are actually using. There's a full 12-page document explaining Haley's Law in detail. It's publicly available, and if you're a parent, it's genuinely worth the read. In the middle of June, a companion bill was introduced in the United States House of Representatives, sponsored by Rudy Yackham. It's known as the Haley Act. Haley stands for High Risk Alert Improvement for Locating Endangered Youth. If passed, it would allow law enforcement to issue an Amber Alert for a missing minor believed to be at high risk, even before an abduction has been officially confirmed. Under current rules, that confirmation is generally required first. The Haley Act would lower that threshold, so that if a child disappears under circumstances suggesting a serious risk to their life or safety, law enforcement could activate a public alert immediately, instead of waiting for investigators to figure out exactly what happened. The Busby family supports both efforts. The Haley Act and Pink Alert aren't competing proposals. They address the same problem at two different levels, one federal and one state. And together they're trying to close a gap the law still doesn't account for: the recognition that a kid who's been psychologically manipulated into leaving home is not the same as a kid who left safely on her own. Stop and think about that for a second. This family is pushing these changes through the Indiana State House and the United States Capitol at the same time, through community education, and through every other avenue available to them, all while still living through the greatest loss of their lives. What they're building is more than a memorial. It's a concrete, legally grounded effort to make sure the next child who disappears under circumstances like Haley's gets a different response than she did. All of this, the legislation, the meetings with lawmakers, the public advocacy, happened while this family was living through the greatest loss of their lives. Just months after Haley's death, they founded a nonprofit organization, developed the framework for new legislation, and began speaking to lawmakers, all in an effort to make the digital world a lot less hospitable to people like Tyler Thomas. Their organization is called Haley's Army for Children. Its mission is straightforward: online safety, prevention, education, and practical awareness built around the threats kids actually face today, not the threats that existed a decade ago. The platforms have changed. The tactics have changed. The law hasn't kept pace.
That's the exact gap Haley's family is trying to close. And that's exactly why Haley's Law exists. At the time this case was covered, a Change.org petition supporting the proposal had already gathered more than 137,000 signatures. That's more than a statistic. It's 137,000 people who read Haley's story and made an individual decision not to stand by and do nothing. Think about what that means for a family that hadn't even reached the first anniversary of their loss. They aren't just grieving, they're working, organizing, and continuing to speak publicly. And their community hasn't left them to carry any of that alone. After Haley's death, the city officially declared February Pink for Haley Month. Pink was her favorite color, and the support wasn't just symbolic. Pink ribbons, pink porch lights, pink decals on cars all over town. Communities don't do that for a name and a headline. They do it for a girl they actually knew, a girl with a favorite color, a laugh people recognized, a presence that left a mark on everyone around her. The pink wasn't for the criminal case. It was for Haley. Haley's funeral was held on February 12th. The church filled well past capacity, people spilling into the hallways and the parking lot outside, neighbors who'd never met the Busby family standing shoulder to shoulder with people who'd known Haley her whole life. Her father, Bo, wrote her a letter, and the pastor read it aloud to the church. Somehow, he found words for something that barely has words. And since then, this family has kept showing up, running the nonprofit, working the legislation, handing out scholarships, organizing a charity motorcycle ride called Harleys for Haley, showing up at school events, all while caring exactly what that day in February cost them. The scholarships awarded through Haley's Army are meant to recognize young people who live with courage, kindness, and a strong sense of purpose. Those aren't random qualities. They're the exact words people use to describe Haley. Her family isn't honoring her memory in the abstract. They're looking for those same qualities in other young people and telling them that what they carry inside themselves actually matters. Here's the part worth sitting with. Haley didn't lose her life because this information didn't exist. Research on online grooming has been available for years. The warning signs have long been documented. The methods people use through gaming platforms and social media aren't secrets. They've been studied, published, and made publicly available. What failed Haley wasn't a lack of knowledge. It was the gap between what experts already understand and what kids are actually taught. The gap between what researchers know and what a 12-year-old hears while sitting alone in their bedroom, long before that knowledge ever becomes essential to their own safety. That's the exact gap Haley's Law is trying to close. And how it intends to do that matters. If kids are taught in school what the grooming cycle actually looks like, in language appropriate for their age, using real examples instead of vague warnings, then at least some of them will recognize it when it starts happening to them. Not all of them, but even some is enough to save lives. The Child Rescue Coalition has already developed educational materials tailored to every school age group. There's also a dedicated guide for parents on how to help kids use modern technology safely. These aren't theoretical documents. They're practical tools, built by people who've spent years working in this field and understand one simple truth. For a lot of parents, the hardest part is simply sitting down beside their kid and starting the conversation at all. A kid who's never had grooming explained to them in plain, age-appropriate language won't recognize it when it starts happening to them. A kid who doesn't have the words to describe what's being done to them can't tell their parents about it, and sometimes can't even fully explain it to themselves. Giving a kid that language early is the difference between a kid who can say she knows exactly what's happening and a kid who just senses something is wrong but stays quiet out of fear she'll get in trouble. That's why Haley's family wants kids to know those words before they ever need them. That's the entire idea. Since Haley's death, the Haley's Army Facebook page has continued posting regular case updates, community events,
and educational resources. Harleys for Haley is a charity motorcycle ride organized specifically to raise awareness of Haley's Law. None of this is a massive government campaign backed by millions of dollars. It's the work of a family and a community that keep choosing over and over again not to stop. This isn't the only hard case a documentary like this one covers, but it stayed with me for a reason that has less to do with what happened to Haley and more to do with what her family did next. No one would have blamed them for withdrawing from the world entirely, for needing years just to figure out how to keep living. Instead, within months, they were already doing everything they could to make sure the next kid would have what Haley didn't. Asking that of people still this deep in grief is close to impossible, and they've carried it anyway. The conversation this case demands isn't a comfortable one. It requires parents to actually know what apps their kids are using. Not just the names, but how they work, what private messaging looks like inside them, what a stranger can offer a kid on a gaming platform at 2 in the morning with no adult anywhere nearby. It requires schools to start treating digital safety as a real subject, not the topic of a single assembly. It requires lawmakers to write laws for the world kids actually live in today, not the world that existed when the old laws were written. None of that happens on its own. It requires people who care enough to keep pushing for it. In February, an entire city turned pink for Haley. Her family is still working to make sure her name comes to represent something more than just another criminal case. She deserved the chance to grow up. She deserved the chance to discover who she was going to become. She never got that chance. Instead, she was given a family that refused to let her become just another statistic, and a community that refused to let that family carry their pain alone. And now, more than 137,000 signatures stand behind a petition demanding that her name change the system. That's what justice can look like after the law has done everything it can. It looks like people deciding that the story doesn't end when the verdict is read. If this case affected you the way it affected me, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true crime documentaries that treat these stories and the families living through them with the weight they actually deserve.